Since Rodrigo and the crew went to all the trouble of setting this up for us here today, I thought it might be a good idea just to go through a little bit of a brief introduction to subtractive synthesis using the Moog Matriarch here. The idea with a subtractive analog synthesizer is that you have something emitting an electronic signal, like a full range of that signal, and then you run it through all these different modules, and you take out little chunks here and there to shape that into the sound that you want to hear. So it's kind of like carving a statue out of marble. You start with a big brick, and if what you want to have is a big brick, then great, you've got a big brick. But if it's not, you need to chip off little bits until only what you want remains. So the same is true here with the Moog Matriarch, and they've kind of tried to arrange it for us so that it makes sense to understand kind of the order in which things are happening here. It's not perfectly in order, so let's take a look. So we have the thing that's emitting our sound, and that is the oscillators. So oscillators are over here. Right now, I've left only oscillator 1 up, and this is the channel here for oscillator 1. So this is just a saw wave, the whole thing, the big brick of marble. We've taken nothing out of it yet. So that's it, and we can change the octave that it plays in by moving this. So you'll see here 16 foot, 8 foot, 4 foot, 2 foot. What is the foot about? Well, that's a holdover from the days of organs when they actually had pipes that were about that length, and that was how they controlled the pitch of the note. So right now we're in the 16-foot range. We can move it all the way up to the 2-foot range if we really want to. We can do the same thing with any of our other 3 oscillators. We can even have them all on different octaves if we want to. Let's hear what that sounds like. We've got our oscillator 1, oscillator 2, oscillator 3, oscillator 4. We can even play them all at the same time if we want to. We also have different types of waves. So basically, oscillators are little devices that generate an electronic signal. And actually, if you look at these signals on an oscilloscope, you will see these shapes. Triangle wave, saw wave, square wave, and pulse wave. A triangle wave is just what it sounds like. It looks like a bunch of triangles. Basically, it's the same as a sine wave, but with a little peak on it, with little sharp valleys as well. Gives it a little bit more bite than just a normal sine wave. A saw wave looks like the teeth of a saw. So straight up, down at a slant, straight up, down at a slant. And it is a really biting kind of tone. We've got the square wave, which has a little bit of bite because of the sharp edges of the square, but it feels a little bit rounder and a little bit meatier than the saw wave. So we got a lot of uses for that kind of in the bass category, but it's good for a lot of other things too. And then we've got the pulse wave, which is like a long flat valley and then a sharp rectangle, and then a long flat valley and then another sharp rectangle. That just kind of has a different sort of sound to it than the square wave. Almost kind of evokes the idea of like an old Game Boy or something like that. Those are our wave types. Now, you'll notice we've got some knobs in the middle here. We can modulate manually the pitch. And this comes in handy when we want to tune our oscillators at intervals. So that is a fifth, for example, or we can do a major third, or even a second. That'll come in handy whenever you want to have like a wider sort of sound. And that also, I will say, is something that you see a lot on organs. Basically, you've got your fundamental note, and then you've got a bunch of harmonic notes above and below that, which are octaves of that root note, or even intervals of that root note. For example, a major third. The Moog Matriarch provides us with 4 of these sound-generating engines that we can use. We can stack them, we can use them one at a time, we can do a lot of things with them. It gives us a lot of flexibility. So moving from our oscillator section, we go to the mixer section. Now the mixer enables us to adjust the volume of these oscillators relative to each other. Right now I've got oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 on, and they are tuned to an octave of each other. So we've got one playing in the 16-foot range, another playing in the 8-foot range. We got a pulse wave and a saw wave. I'm going to put them both on saw waves. So you may not be able to hear them both, but you surely do miss the second oscillator when it goes away. That's all of our oscillators playing at the same time. You get the idea. We can just mix the volume relative to each other. Now we do also have another knob here, and this knob is the noise knob. And noise is a really useful thing to have. Here's what it sounds like. Kind of like a sleep sound or something like that. This is just a totally random electric signal. We can do a lot of things with it, actually. We can make like wind sounds, for example. Let's hear what this sounds like. Pretty cool. And we can mix that in with our oscillators as well. It's good for a lot of effects as well. You can make, for example, like a snare sound with it. Let's just do that real quick here. Yeah, that sounds like a snare. I mean, you could probably do better, but it's a pretty good snare. All right, I'm gonna bring that back down, zero all this stuff out. Let's move on to our next section. So the sound is generated at the oscillators. It runs through the mixer where you can mix the volume of your various noise sources, various sound sources, let's say, relative to each other. Then those things go into the filter section. Now the filter section is where you really start to be able to sculpt that sound like we talked about with the marble. So let's just listen to the low pass filter in the Moog Matriarch. Okay, even though there is only one big knob on the Moog Matriarch, you do in fact have actually two filters. And you can see here that there's a few different options for how they operate. So right now we were operating in low pass mode, which means that on both stereo sides of the Moog Matriarch, you're using a low pass filter. Let's listen to the high pass low pass filter. And to the high pass low pass parallel filter. So the one on the left is high pass low pass in series. And the one on the right is high pass, low pass in parallel. So you can hear at both ends here, the sound is the same. It's in the middle, where you hear the two sides kind of doing the opposite on each side there. I'll just briefly describe these other three knobs. So the spacing allows you to adjust the two filters relative to each other. The envelope amount controls how much of your filter envelope is being used. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And the keyboard tracking uses your position on the keyboard as a way to basically automate the filter. So if you have it all the way up, for example, then your higher notes are going to be brighter than your lower notes. If you have it all the way down, then your lower notes are going to be brighter than your higher notes. So for the moment, we are going to skip over the utilities section and we're going to move on to our envelope generators. So envelope generators enable you to sculpt the sound over the course of the time that it plays. They're a way to modulate your sound temporally. We have two envelope generators. We have a filter envelope generator and we have an amplitude envelope generator. Our filter envelope generator is going to control the filter over time. So let's go ahead and dial something in here. I'm going to bring the sustain down. I'm going to take the attack up, the decay up, leave the release where it is, bring the resonances up, and we should be able to hear this, bringing the envelope amount up as well. Pretty dramatic, right? And you'll notice I didn't sweep anything up here. It's been automated using the filter envelope. Pretty cool. The envelope amount controls how much of that is going through. So if you leave it at 12 o'clock, none of it goes through, none at all. If you bring it down to negative, then it kind of inverts it, right? So it's super dark at first, and it starts to get a little brighter and come through a bit. Which is a pretty cool sound. We bring it up, and we get the sound that we dialed in. So attack is how quickly the effect begins. Decay is how quickly it decays down to the sustain, and release is how quickly it goes away when you release the note. Kind of the same rules apply for our amplitude envelope generator. So this is going to chart the volume of the sound over time. So I'm going to bring the resonance down here, take our cutoff to about 50%. So that's the sound that we got going right now. I am going to now bring us a setting here. Okay, so it took a second to swell up to its maximum point. It took a second then to decay from that point, and it sustained at a very low level. Now release is going to let it trail off when we release the key. So that's our amplitude envelope generator. Let's skip stereo delay for the moment and move on to our modulation section. So we actually kind of have two modulation areas. We got this big one over here, and then we got this little baby one over here, which isn't labeled as such, but that's what it is. So we have our four oscillators here. We got two special oscillators, one of them here and one of them here. These are low frequency oscillators, meaning that they go at a much lower rate than the oscillators that we have here in the oscillator section. And we have a whole bunch of weird, funky wave shapes that we can do. So we've got sine wave, which is a wave that we don't have over here on these oscillators. We've got sawtooth wave, which is a wave that we do have over on these oscillators. We got inverse sawtooth, which we do not have over here. Square wave, which we do have. We've got the arpeggiator, which we can actually use as a modulation source. And then we've got random, which again, that is just nuts that that's something that they were able to include. It's kind of the same as a noise generator, just operating at a much lower frequency. Over here on this one, we've only got two, right? So we don't have a switch to rock between them, but we've got square out and we've got triangle out. With this modulation section, you can automatically, without any patching or any cables, you can automatically use the mod wheel to bring it in, right? And then you can choose what you are modulating with that. Right now, I'm set not to modulate the pulse width amount and not to modulate the pitch, but to modulate the cutoff. Let's see what that sounds like. That is what it sounds like to modulate our cutoff. We've also got pulse width amount. Now that is really special. So you noticed earlier that we have this pulse wave. Kind of sounds like an airplane that's about to go down. I don't want to be on that airplane. It's almost kind of like you have two oscillators running, because in fact you actually do. You're using your low frequency oscillator to modulate the pulse width of your other pulse wave oscillator. Kind of gives it some motion, and you can decrease the speed of that to make it more subtle. Let's listen to some of these other wave shapes using the filter, just so you can get a sense for what they are. So that's saw wave, inverse saw wave, square wave, sequencer, and random. Okay, hopefully that gave you some kind of sense what those different wave shapes are. We also have pitch amount that we can modulate. Here we go. So it's kind of a vibrato, And there's a lot of people who use it very effectively for music, but it's a lot crazier than the vibrato that you get on any kind of acoustic instrument. And that's kind of why I don't use it very often. So we've gone through this modulation section. This one over here we can only use by patching. This one is built in. This one we can only use by patching. So if we want to hear it, we have to use our cables. So I'm going to take the triangle out here and bring that over to, actually let's take it over to the mult bay, just so I can invert this signal. This is something I do a whole lot because it's a way to get more diversity out of the same modulation source. Perhaps I'm doing too much here, just being too complicated, but let's see what this sounds like. Pretty cool. So we're taking our triangle out and we're using it to modulate the filter. We can do the same thing with our square out. You'll notice that the left and right is inverted here. Rather than doing that, I'm just going to show you in the simplest way what this could sound like. If you're only using one cable, cut off one end. There we go. That was something I actually forgot to cover when we were at the filter section, that these filters can do something called self-oscillate. And what that means is that you don't actually even need an oscillator. You can use your filter as an oscillator, and I'll show you how that works. So basically, I've got the resonance turned way up. Now I'm going to bring all of our oscillators down, so there's no oscillators going through at all. We still hear something. Why is that? It's because our resonance is turned up so high that the filter is self-oscillating. And I'm not going to be going through the arpeggiator and sequencer. Basically what this is you can hit a note and it'll play a pattern. Actually, I'll just do it real quick so you can hear what it is. Okay, so that is our sequencer. Basically, I programmed in that series of notes in advance, and then you can press down the hold button, it'll hold it, keep it playing without you having to hold a note, and you can play that sequence using the subtractive synthesis parameters available on the surface of the keyboard, which is pretty cool. But I will not be explaining how to do it here. There are plenty of other videos that do that. This is going to be more focused on the subtractive synthesis capabilities of the Matriarch. So I'm going to stop that, and we'll talk about our stereo delay. So you probably heard me just dial that in for a second there. It really makes a big difference. With any kind of analog synthesizer, it's usually a pretty either harsh or a little bit exposed tone that you get out of the instrument. And the vast majority of people use some reverb or some delay to kind of wetten things up and make them seem much more organic. And on the Moog Matriarch, they have provided us with an analog stereo delay. The first knob that we got here is the mix knob. That controls how much of the delay is going through. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and bring our sequence back so that we can So we got our sequence running. Let's listen to this delay here. Now with an analog delay, when you adjust the time, it has the effect of affecting the pitch. Spacing knob changes the time in one ear versus the other, which also affects the relative pitch. And feedback is how much the delay is sticking around for. So to bring the feedback up, there's a point at which it will self-oscillate, just like the filter. It'll be a pretty cacophonous noise. You don't even need a sound source to drive it. So that's the stereo analog delay on the Moog Matriarch. You also have a sync button, so you can sync the delay to a particular control voltage, or you can tap to set the delay in tempo with your piece. All right, this is another really important thing for the Moog. So we got paraphony over here. So far, everything that I've been doing has been monophonic. But one of the great things about the Moog Matriarch is its paraphonic capabilities, meaning that you can actually play more than one note at a time, which, believe it or not, is not standard on analog synthesizers. Actually, pretty expensive usually to get a paraphonic or polyphonic analog synthesizer. So the Moog Matriarch has either our monophonic mode, two-voice paraphonic mode, it's kind of a weird performance, but two-voice paraphonic mode nonetheless. And then we've also got four-voice paraphonic mode, which allows us to play, famously, 4 notes at one time. Which can be really beautiful. Now, it is not the same as a polyphonic synthesizer because you don't have dedicated envelopes for each note. So if you were to play, for example, that, and then add another note on top of it, then it re-triggers all those envelopes when you hit the second note. So it can be a little tricky to get used to, but it can also be really beautiful. Anyway, this was a short walkthrough of the Moog Matriarch with an emphasis on learning subtractive synthesis. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, maybe check out some of these sounds that I have made available for download. They are for everyone, and I hope you enjoy them.